Good morning. Good morning and welcome all to this important conversation this morning. I'm Paul Grogan, president of the Boston Foundation, and we're so pleased at another great turnout for an important forum. I think I see an awful lot of friends in the room today, so I think most of you know what the Boston Foundation is. We are Greater Boston's community foundation, a 102-year-old charity that is stewarding over $1 billion in the philanthropic assets of this community currently. The foundation and its donors make over $100 million of grants to Boston area nonprofits every year. But in addition to our stewardship of philanthropic assets and grant making, as you know, we like to hold forums like this under the banner of civic leadership to help all of us define the challenges and opportunities that we face and act on them. And we have a very robust program of forums throughout the year. They are made possible by the Civic Leadership Fund, an annual fund raised by the foundation to support civic leadership activities. Those of you who have contributed to the fund, we are very grateful. Today's topic is early childhood education, and we're going to get, I think, a very clear picture of where things stand. But we know some things already. One is that for every dollar invested in high quality early childhood education, there is a return of almost $13 on that investment when you factor in lifetime earnings, reduced crime, lower welfare costs, and so forth. This incredibly high rate of return has attracted many in the philanthropic sector to identify early childhood education and health as an area where we could meaningfully address the systemic inequalities in our society. In fact, the Bridgespan group recently named early childhood as an area where a $1 billion philanthropic investment would do the most to increase the upward social mobility for low-income individuals. Unfortunately, our spending levels, public and private, do not really reflect what the research has told us about how much occurs in human development in the first several years of life. So we have this research, which I think is not in serious dispute, but we are not mobilizing the resources that would reflect our understanding of how crucial things are in the early years. So we are trying to make our contribution at the Boston Foundation by recognizing the promise of early childhood as a lever for broader social change. As part of our 2020 strategic plan, we are committed to exploring and supporting an early childhood strategy that will improve young children's readiness for success in school and life. Our strategy has two components: increasing access to quality pre-K for 4-year-olds and strengthening the interactions between caregivers and Boston's youngest children, ages 0 through 3. Throughout the coming year, we will be hosting a series of forums and convenings here at the Foundation to highlight opportunities and challenges in the early childhood space. In fact, we'll be hosting another forum on December 6th to highlight the research by our grantee, Dr. Elsie Tavares, on a cross-sector initiative at Mass General to reduce childhood obesity during the first 1,000 days of a child's life. And on January 24th, we'll be hosting a roundtable conversation on early childhood to highlight other compelling research that is underway. But today we're here to discuss pre-K, and in particular, how the City of Boston is doing to expand access to high-quality pre-K seats in Boston. And I want to commend the mayor and his administration for their work on this. There are many, many competing priorities which demand attention and resources, and this administration has dedicated a significant time and resources to ensure that every child in Boston has access to high-quality pre-K. But to tell us more about what the city is doing and where things stand, I'd like to call up the city's outstanding Chief of Education, Ron Dorsey, who is our close partner on this and so many critical issues. Please welcome Ron Dorsey.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, wow, it's a much fuller room than when I sat down. That's good. And it's good to be here with friends on a great Wednesday morning. First of all, I want to thank Paul and Elizabeth for the opportunity to talk about the universal pre-K work that we're doing in Boston and to tell all of you about the journey that we've been on for quite some time here to get to universal pre-K. Just to give you an idea of what we're going to talk through, first I'm going to do some acknowledgments because I think to kick this off, we need to make sure that you understand that the work that we've done is community work. And while the Walsh administration has taken up the banner for a lot of community work, it's a lot of the folks in this room and beyond who have actually gotten Boston to the place that we are. I want to do some context setting with you to help you understand where we are in the pre-K movement nationally and where Boston sits in that context. I'm then going to invite Dr. Jason Sachs, the Director for Early Learning in the Boston Public Schools, to give you an overview of the journey that we've been on over about the last decade plus. And then I will back clean up on this presentation and talk about universal pre-K and our strategy going forward before we then hear from some of the panelists and the people who are doing the work on the ground. So first of all, acknowledgments. So there are a lot of names on this list, but this is really just a cross-section of the people who helped us develop the current universal pre-K strategy for Boston. These are mostly the people who participated in the mayor's advisory groups since he came into office in 2014. But what this doesn't account for is the 1,600 parents that we talked to either by survey or in focus groups. It doesn't account for the people who caught me on the street and said, Ron, you need to do your job. Here's what I think about universal pre-K. So I want to thank these people on behalf of the mayor. And just real quickly, if you were in the room and you had anything to do with this, you were on an advisory group or you caught me on the street and told me to do my job, please stand up real quickly so we can acknowledge you. And there are a couple of people that I'm going to get because I see you and you didn't stand up. So we'll have that conversation following this. I want to give a special acknowledgement to the Barr Foundation and to the United Way, who made big contributions in the systems design and strategy development phase of this work. And so the mayor is very appreciative of the work of both of those organizations. So a little context setting for you. Even though pre-K seems to be a part of our consistent conversations about education and about education policy, this has actually been a slow-moving march toward pre-K investment nationally. And so while 40 states are investing in what they call universal pre-K, there are only about 9 who are deeply doing universal pre-K, and only about 3 who are ensuring that at least half of 4-year-olds in their state have access to pre-K. And that's a little agnostic of quality at this point. Now, Oklahoma tripped up and did this because pre-K was a rider on a Republican bill. And they woke up the next morning and Republicans realized they had voted for universal pre-K. And I think they were trying to build highways or something. So check out the NPR report on that. It's actually pretty fascinating and pretty comical in some ways, but if that's the way it has to get done, I will take it. So cities tend to be where the action is right now, and so here you see the logos for New Jersey, Denver, Seattle, New York, Philadelphia, and DC. These were the cities that we took a look at that have been developing universal pre-K systems in those places. In many of those places, the focus was first on access. But as this has evolved, this has evolved into much more of a focus on how do we expand quality. And we'll talk more about the importance of that. But we wanted to take a look at these cities because they're thinking about how do you toggle between many different settings. They're thinking about what is the definition of pre-K quality that we've learned from both the literature and that we have from the experience of practitioners, and how does this get funded? And most of the way pre-K is getting funded in America right now is either through state line items and set-asides or through municipal taxes. And so here's part of the challenge that we will probably continue to talk a little bit about for Boston as we do this work. First of all, the mayor does have a proposal in front of the legislature to tap convention center funds that would fully fund universal pre-K in Boston, but we've got to go through the legislative process to get there. On the other side, Boston does not have taxable authority. And so where other cities have said, we're going to institute a soda tax or we're going to do X, Y, Z, Boston does not have the power to do that outside of the legislature's permission. And so we've had to get creative about how to do this, which is one of the reasons that we generated this convention center proposal. So we will continue to think through these things, but these cities have been part of the template for us. That said, Boston has been the template for many of these cities because arguably there's nobody doing quality better than Boston. When you look nationwide, we have really figured out a lot at the BPSK1 level, how to replicate a lot of that work throughout community providers. Our community providers are probably the best when you think about what parent engagement looks like. And so you've probably seen in articles in the Atlantic Monthly and a few other periodicals, people looking at the city of Boston for direction in terms of thinking about what quality pre-K looks like. I will not steal Jason Sachs's thunder here because he's going to tell you a lot about this journey. I will mention real quickly that the state has been an incredible partner on this journey to pre-K quality. The quality rating indicator system, which was instituted, give me the time period, Jocelyn, maybe a decade or so ago, the QRIS? 2009. So the state has been adamant about focusing on pre-K and quality in pre-K and was the organizer for the pre-K expansion grant participation. So we are in a federal demonstration around pre-K quality, one of 10 places in the nation, and we've organized Boston and the gateway cities to do that work. And there are a lot of emerging lessons to share about that. But in part, what we already knew. Quality matters, and part of what we're learning from the pre-K expansion grant is how do you do the systems design and the systems building work. So don't let it be said, because we've heard this from some legislators on Beacon Hill, we're waiting to see what the results of the evaluation on the pre-K expansion grant are, with the insinuation that we're waiting to see whether quality matters or not. That ship sailed a long time ago. And so I think what we are trying to learn about is actually how do you build an equitable system for pre-K. And so we're looking forward to some of those results. So without further ado, to give you an overview of the journey that we've been on to get to high quality pre-K in Boston and Massachusetts, I want to introduce a man who can and should take a lot of credit for the progress that has been made to achieve high quality pre-K in Boston, and that is Dr. Jason Sachs, our Director of Early Learning in the Boston Public Schools.
Good morning, everybody. All right, so this is going to be a work of rolling up our sleeves. So just get ready to roll up your sleeves because we have been doing this for 12 years now in the city. And before I came to the city, I was at the State Department of Education, which used to actually fund a lot of programs in the city of Boston, and it's been shifted now under the Department of Early Education and Care, our good partner. So when Ron asked me to sort of do the history, I was like, okay, I got to look at other people's slides. That's kind of hard to do. And then I thought, wait, this is 12 years of my life, so I think I can wing this one. So about 12 years ago, the mayor then, our great Mayor Menino, basically said, we want to do universal preschool in the city of Boston. And he said, we're going to do it in the Boston Public Schools. Oh, no problem. Thank you. We're gonna do this in the Boston Public Schools, and we said, okay, that's there's a lot of community-based providers out there, but if you want to do it in the Boston Public Schools, let's figure out that part of it. And his rationale basically was not that community-based providers couldn't do it, but that there wasn't funding enough for them to do sustained, strong, high-quality early education. And so he and Tom Payson basically said, let's try it in the public schools, figure it out, and then there is a desire to think about how to do this in community setting. And so they actually planted a seed in a pilot program, in a community-based program, that we did this in parallel. So in 2005, we started in the public schools with always the thinking of how could this work in community-based programs. And so that was the impetus for this. And the Boston Public Schools basically expanded from about 300 children to about 2,500 children with teachers who had master's degrees and who were paid starting salaries of about $55,000 a year in a system of a coordinated school district. And I know the Boston Public Schools, a coordinated school district, might be an oxymoron because clearly they are autonomous schools. But in the system, you were able to do something that was brand new, and everybody said, fine, we'll implement one curriculum, which is an amazing feat in the Boston Public Schools. And we will do all our planning together. We have a kindergarten conference so we can set a vision for all the teachers. And so we were able to relatively fast, in about 5 years, set a universal preschool system for all families with one curriculum, with coaching support, with private and public dollars that really moved the needle on what quality looked like. And we developed a model that we said, all right, so let's try and figure out how to do this in community-based programs. And at the same time, in the city, in about 2008, everybody's like, yes, we are worried about preschool. And yes, we know that community-based programs were actually financially put at risk because you did this public free preschool thing. But what about the 0 to 3 population? What about the 0 to 5? What about 0 to 8? Really thinking about families. And so Thrive on 5 was launched in 2008 to really begin to think about how do we build a coalition and thinking about that. Now we move on to a new mayor. And Mayor Walsh has been tremendous in thinking about, okay, I understand that Boston gets all this great credit for doing universal preschool in the public schools, but what about the community-based providers? What about the 0 to 5 community? And where is our place there? And so rather than just expand the public schools, we took a step back and we said, so let's look at the whole 0 to 5, 0 to 8 community and really think through what programs we can do. And so we set about to do an advisory to really think about what would universal preschool look like in a mixed delivery system in both community-based programming and the public school, and how we can learn from that. And so that's the work we've really been thinking through. And then we received some startup money from the Barr Foundation to really think about Boston Kids, which was actually try and take the preschool program that was done in the Boston Public School and think through what it would look like in the community-based program. And so we did that for a couple of years, and we knew that the hardest part to community-based programs is the funding mechanism for salaries, right? You need to have strong teachers. Everything we're going to talk about for the rest of the day is dependent on the teacher. The curriculum, the professional development is really important, but if the teacher is not solid, if the teacher does not have the ability to trust in the children and in the work, then you're not going to move quality. So every time we say quality, think of everything that supports a teacher. Okay, so we set about in 2000 and I need my timeline, but to do kids about 8 years ago, and we set through basically. So we have this really strong curriculum, and we have really strong coaches, and these coaches are people from community-based programs. These are folks from who were in the Boston Public Schools as coaches, and basically we set about to figure out, could we take our model and put it in community-based programs. And so part of what you need to know about me is I'm a research and evaluator, and so all of this comes with some fairly strong research and evaluation, and the Barr Foundation also gave us resources to do that. So as you as funders need to think about, not only are we investing in teachers and supporting, we also need to be thinking about how do you research and evaluate this and use data. So we started off in some community-based programs. I think it was 10 classrooms. And what we found basically in the Boston Kids program was that you could move quality, and that quality, in fact, could be as high in community-based programs as it could be in the public schools. But it's harder to sustain because of all the things that are going on in the program, and you can't move it as much. So if I'll geek out on you guys. So if you can move outcomes in students by 0.5, so 0.5 standard deviation. Basically, if you can make that much of a dent, which is a huge dent in social studies, in social work, basically a 0.2 standard deviation, you're supposed to say we're geniuses, we've saved the world. We in Boston really were able in the Boston Public Schools to move outcomes by about 0.5 of a standard deviation. In community-based programs, we were able to move it about a 0.3, so it was very successful. But we didn't quite get to 0.5, but again, you don't have master level teachers. It's a very different kind of approach. You have different programs. But the point is that we were able to do it, but the sustaining it was harder because of systems challenges. So that's where we sort of sat. And we were also able to move it both in math and literacy, and it's critical to talk about math as well, because in the community-based programs, there was less math going on. And so part of this program was how do we implement a math curriculum simultaneously with a strong literacy curriculum. So we were able to do that. And then along came the preschool expansion grant, which was a large federal grant and an investment in how can you do universal preschool from the federal government. And this is when Obama was basically like, I'm not waiting around anymore, I'm putting money out there. And so he put out these preschool expansion grants. Massachusetts applied, and Massachusetts basically applied in part on the work that Boston was doing. And in fact, not to brag, but I would say that the federal program in part was based on what we were doing, which was pretty exciting. And so we were in a good opportunity to actually apply for the preschool expansion grant, and then Boston was one of the programs that got to do it. And so our goal was, okay, so now how do we figure out how to do this in a mixed delivery system? And what was great about the preschool expansion grant is that it basically said teachers have to be paid the starting salary of the Boston Public Schools. So it gave us a large amount of money, basically $53,000 starting salary, money for directors and money for teachers to think about how do we do this appropriately in community-based settings. At the same time, the community-based providers had more of a chance to have something not done to them, but to actually help us design the program in a way that the money was going directly to them. And the state was very clear that not only did it have to be a preschool program for 4-year-olds, it had to be year-round and full day. Because really, unfortunately, if you look at the Boston Public School program, it's a 6-hour a day, 10 months of the year. And so it means working families can't really access the public schools. For some families can't, and they have to make this really difficult choice of, do I use a community-based setting, which is fine, but it doesn't guarantee me a space into that public school. So we were making parents make really tough choices between community-based programs and public schools, and the preschool expansion grant really allowed us the opportunity to think about what would 12 months of the year, 8-hour services look like that is much more compensated. And so Tiara's going to say, wait, you're about to talk to me, but this is Tiara Dias, and she has been managing the preschool expansion grant for a while, so everybody say hello. And Tiara's got more work, as you'll find out later on. She's got more work to do in the city. But so we really have spent, I would say, the last 4 years thinking through how to make this work with our community-based partners. I'm sure they'll have lots to say about the experience, both good and bad, and the challenges and the opportunities. But what I guess I will close my portion of this with just saying is that this work is doable. It's extremely exciting. Often I'm so caught up in how do we get this done that I don't really say what a marvelous opportunity this is. I think we are in a very unique space where there is funding, there is support, there is you all, which we're going to need tremendously. I think we have learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work, and we are going to continue to learn this together. And I guarantee you we will research and evaluate it all the way through, and it won't stop in preschool. And that's really important. So if you know what I've been doing for the last 5 years is actually I've turned this way and talked about kindergarten reform, first grade and second grade reform, and spent a lot of time thinking about if we get this right, we need to have kindergarten, first, second grade correct. And we do need to have the 0 to 3 community, and where the Boston Public Schools will be happy to partner in that area. So now I give it back to Ron.
So in case you didn't know, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Sachs's leadership in the city, along with the community of providers and thought leaders around pre-K and early education and early elementary education. When Mayor Walsh came into office, he came in with a vision for universal pre-K in Boston, and very early on issued a charge to the city to get every 4-year-old into a pre-K program, and a high-quality pre-K program. And I'll say that when he first came in, it was just about pre-K access. And these people on the front row and some other folks educated the mayor about why quality is important. And so his view of what we needed to do became a lot more nuanced, a lot more tricky in terms of the systems design and some other things. But he wanted to make sure that he was doing the right thing for young people and making the right investments in the places that care for them. So a few things I want to share with you. First of all, you will hear this as almost a mantra from this point going forward. Boston does not have an access problem for the most part. And so where I think a lot of the question to us has been about, when are you going to create more seats? When are you going to create more capacity? The fact of the matter is that we've got more supply than demand for the most part, and that is true in most neighborhoods. And so what you see on this map, those neighborhoods that are in green, the number of seats exceeds the number of 4-year-olds in each of those neighborhoods, only with the exception of a little place downtown and Hyde Park and a part of Dorchester do we have a place where we think we have a negligible gap where demand slightly exceeds supply. And so what we are actually solving for is quality. So what we need to make sure of is that we think that about 90% of 4-year-olds in the city are accessing pre-K. What we need to make sure is that when they walk into that door, whatever door they choose, it is of the highest quality. And so this is the definition of quality that we've agreed upon as a city, informed by our provider community and informed by the experts who've been a part of this process. First, it's about a highly trained and well-compensated teacher. And so Jason just told you that a lot of what quality is about is what we put into and underneath the teacher to do their jobs. It's about using an evidence-based curriculum. So let's make sure that what we're doing is rigorous. It's about many of the things that go along with accreditation. So safe environments, age-appropriate spaces, the right teacher ratios, et cetera, that you are meeting the state's quality standards as well, which overlap with accreditation. We want to make sure that there is coaching and professional development going on. Again, this is what you put underneath the instructor. We want to make sure that there is strong family engagement and that you are using data and assessment for continuous program improvement. This is what we want everybody in the city adhering to, and this is what we need to invest in. And so I'll talk a little bit later about those investments. So when we then wanted to look at quality, if we don't have a access problem but a quality problem, what do we understand about the distribution of quality across the city? So we did a survey of many of our community-based providers, about 200 plus, as well as a set of observations with the Wellesley Centers for Women of about 60 classrooms over the past summer. This is self-reported data, but we do think that providers were very candid and forthright with us about their capacity and their practice. And we typically ask them about whether or not their teachers had degrees, whether they were using evidence-based curriculum, and whether they are accredited. And so what you see here in the places in blue, these are neighborhoods where you've got a cluster of providers who told us maybe we aren't quite meeting the threshold that you're defining here. And so we're talking about East Boston, Roxbury, Dorchester, Rosendale, Hyde Park, and West Roxbury, where we think we have the largest quality seat gaps. So it's either that you don't have accreditation, it's that your teachers don't have BAs or above, but something about that quality definition is missing. We think that the overall gap is about a 1,500 quality seat gap in the city of Boston. And so what we want to do is to start to address that gap and close it. What the map suggests to you is that we have to take a localized approach to this as well. There are mixes of different providers. The intensity of that gap differs by neighborhood. And so we want to target in some ways these places to close those gaps. So the basic program design for Universal Pre-K in Boston is a free school day, school year program. And so read and free, the first big ticket item for Universal Pre-K, because this means that we want to pay for tuition in all community-based settings so that children and families can access them. Jason already alerted you to the potential equity challenge in this first piece. This says school day, school year. And what Jason just told you is that we've got to get to full day, full year care as well. And so one of the things that we will be addressing in our system development is how do we make sure that we are full day, full year, wherever service is being provided. This is a system that will be done through mixed delivery, and what we mean by that is it's school-based classrooms as well as community-based classrooms as well. Why are we doing this? In part because 1,600 parents told us that we want the option. Some of us are not ready to have our child in a school building yet at age 4. Some of us trust that provider that's right around the corner from us or who is right near our workplace, and we want to continue to use that provider. The other advantage that we have is that we've got a robust mix of provider types in almost every neighborhood, with really no particular provider dominating the market share in any neighborhood. So we've got to use that network of providers to make sure that we get to universal access and quality for all. We want to make sure that quality is elevated across all providers. So those quality elements that I just talked about, we'll be investing in teacher degrees, we'll be investing in teacher compensation so that we can equalize between community settings and BPS settings. We'll be investing in ongoing coaching, curriculum development, and curriculum on-ramp. We'll be investing in accreditation for sites. And so each of these has a different kind of ticket items, ticket price. Some are one-time buys for the most part, like accreditation. Maybe less so for curriculum, where we have to buy that, but also make sure that there's the training for institutionalization. There are ongoing costs like the tuition payment and the investment in teachers that we really have to think about as the big ticket items. We're currently trying to optimize the resources that we have at our disposal to do this. So the the pre-K expansion grant continues for about another 12 months. The federal funding will be used to continue to build this system. We're looking for philanthropic support. We've certainly got the mayor's proposal out there, and we'll be submitting a proposal to the mayor in the next couple of weeks to build UPK systems building into Boston's operating budget as well. We've got to be the initial investors in this work. So that's the basic outline of what we're planning to do. The key next steps for us are first building a governance and staffing model. There will be a citywide UPK director. We kind of know who it is. I'm not going to tell you who it is right now, but that person is the right person for the job. I become more and more convinced of that every day, and has the track record to do that. We will also build an oversight committee of a mix of experts and people who are champions for pre-K to guide the development of the system. We're starting to do professional development early implementation. One, to do a curriculum institute for providers across the city, and then to start teacher training for providers across the city. And we're partnering with Ann Douglas from UMass Boston on that work. There's systems building work, connective tissue work that we have to start to do. One of those things is about looking at the feeder system in Boston. How are our community-based settings going to be connected to the school choice process? So our community partners have told us it hurts us when a family has to leave our center to make a school choice in BPS. That's an enrollment hit for us. Parents have said we're nervous and anxious when we have to figure out how to play the school assignment and school choice game. We want to choose the pre-K setting that we want and know that we will preserve our school choices in the process. So we'll look at those sorts of systems issues as well. We are in phase 1 of the work, but know that the work is now being implemented and UPK has come to Boston. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Pauley. I'm the Senior Director for Education to Career here at the Boston Foundation, and I am delighted to be facilitating the panel conversation, which we'll hear in a moment. I did just want to first thank Ron and Jason, both for the work that you do and for explaining it to us today. So thank you very much. We'll be back to you with questions, I'm quite certain. As Paul mentioned in his opening comments, the Boston Foundation has in its most recent strategic plan, realized that early childhood is an important time of life. And for those of you in this room who have devoted your lives as passionate advocates to the early childhood work, I'm sure you're like, welcome to the party. And so thank you. We're happy to be there. So in the year ahead, we will be organizing a series of forums and learning opportunities. So as we get smart about places where we can support the work for children ages prenatal to 3 and 4 and 5, that we will extend that opportunity to you as well, to learn alongside us. So in the next year, we will focus on contributing to building a shared knowledge base. We will work to build awareness and understanding of the opportunities and challenges in the early childhood space. And then we'll look to support innovative solutions to long-standing challenges. I think what I heard from Ron and Jason is that there's no simple solution to doing this work. It's complicated and comprehensive. So we'll be looking to support innovative solutions to these long-standing challenges that have presented themselves in the early childhood space. And finally, we'll be looking to partner with others. We have a lot to learn in this space, and there have been others doing the work. So we're happy to partner with others to scale proven and promising programs. And so today, as part of our learning journey and building broad awareness, we have not only brought the two foremost experts in our city, Ron and Jason, but we have brought a panel of experts to you. So I invite them to join me up here on the stage, and I will introduce them as they arrive. We'll plan to spend the better part of the next hour talking about why this work is hard, where the challenges are, and what it looks like in the work. So we'll just go right down the line. You have their full bios on your seat behind your agenda. So immediately next to me, we have Sharon Scott Chandler, who is the Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President at ABCD. Welcome, Sharon. Next to Sharon, we have Dr. Ann Douglas, who is Associate Professor and Program Director for Early Childhood and Care at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Welcome, Ann. Next to Ann, we have Wayne Isagare, who is the President and CEO of The Nursery. Wayne, welcome. Next to Wayne, we have Kelly Pellegrini, who is the co-founder and co-director of the Charlestown Nursery School. Welcome, Kelly. And next to Kelly, we have Dr. Jocelyn Bound, who is the Director of Research and Preschool Expansion Grant Administration at the Massachusetts Department for Early Education and Care, excuse me. So welcome all. Sharon, I'm going to start to you, frankly, because you're the closest next to me. I'd like to know, as someone who works directly with children and families, what is your reaction to the universal pre-K quality standards Boston is proposing? What are the challenges related to that?
Well, and I was part of the advisory group developing those standards and looking at those standards. And one thing that I can say, I think, is they're excellent standards, and they're not a surprise, because we've known for a long time, the research over the years has told us those key components. I think we haven't been able to focus on them. We're always choosing one versus the other. And I think for community-based settings, we're strong in some, family engagement and safe environments, and some of the other, and where we've been able to work, and Jason has over the last 10 years, is the curriculum side and the teachers and coaching and instruction. And so I think all of the elements have always been there. It's just, how can we invest in all of them? How can we really take the full comprehensive approach to quality and move it forward for all programs?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Wayne and Kelly, I'd like to turn to you both next. So Wayne, I'll start with you. What gets in the way of delivering a quality program?
So I think some of the elements that Jason described are the elements of quality is in fact what's missing, right? So a supply of educated, talented, degreed teachers is a challenge. That the state is not producing enough teachers to fill these positions, so that gets in the way. The other thing that sort of gets in the way is when Jason was talking about quality, he was talking about the importance of the teacher. Right, and that's at the center of quality. The other thing I would say is the system. Quality is a function of both the educator and the system in which that educator is positioned. And one of the challenges will be to design pre-K for the community-based setting in the very same way that we designed pre-K for the BPS system. And I think that is a very key challenge, and one I'm positive we can address, but I do think that is key.
Great, and I'd like to hear the same question to Kelly, but Wayne, we'll come back and ask for your advice about how to design that program for community-based program shortly. Kelly, what challenges do you see?
I think, as Jason and Ron and Wayne just named, it's really around finding that teacher workforce and creating systems that allow for that support. I'm always reminded that 39% of our early childhood educators in Massachusetts qualify for public assistance. I think it's what Jason and Ron and the mayor have done so well, and these reports have given us, is a really naming those challenges, really, and putting them on the forefront so that we know exactly sort of what we're up against. I think they've also given us a great model, though, for training the teachers that we have in front of us. And I think their evidence in the community-based programs is really promising and hopeful. But it is very hard to fill teaching positions, and it's very hard to support that kind of quality when people are not making the salaries that they need.
And your work focuses on teachers, and we've talked already this morning, Jason and Ron both referenced it, and Wayne and Kelly also referenced it. We've talked a lot about teacher quality. So as someone at the University of Massachusetts Boston, as someone who focuses on teachers, where does the system break down? What's the challenge behind getting quality teachers in every classroom?
So most of the teachers, as I think has become evident, most of the teachers who are working in community-based childcare centers don't necessarily have bachelor's degrees already. So they're having to earn their bachelor's degree while they're working. So that's a challenge in the first place. And they're making a salary that's often 1/3 what a public school teacher makes doing the comparable job. So how are they going to pay? So how are they going to have the time to get a bachelor's degree when they're already working, and how are they going to pay for it? So there are some state funding streams, and the PEG program has helped provide funds to enable teachers to cover the costs of getting a bachelor's degree. In 2009, UMass Boston launched its new bachelor's degree program, and it was designed exactly to meet this need, to be in a public institution, to be designed for people who are in the workforce so that they can go after work, they can take all their classes they need in the evening, on the weekends. In 2009, we had about 10 students in our first cohort in our bachelor's degree program, and we now have almost 300 students, half of whom are already working in the early care and education workforce in the city of Boston, working towards their college degree, and many of them are accessing the early educator scholarship in the state, as well as other forms of financial aid. And one of the things our students say, our adult learners who are working in the workforce, often say is that this is a lifelong dream of theirs to get their bachelor's degree. They were never able to do it, and now they are. They feel like they're setting an example for their own children at home, as well as the children and the families that they're serving. So I think we need to create higher education opportunities that are accessible to members of the workforce, that value and respect the expertise they bring. So they're coming in at advanced standing with often college credits they're transferring from community colleges when they come into our bachelor's degree program. They have worked in the field sometimes for a decade, 2 decades, so they bring that expertise. And what they really need to be doing and are doing is connecting their practical expertise from all those years in the field with the new science and the knowledge that we now have in early care and education. And that's what really enables them to get the credential that they need, but also to amplify the impact that they can have in their teaching practice.
So is it fair to say that in addition to the need for a robust educator pipeline, we also need to make sure we have accessible higher education and credentialing programs?
We need to have that, and the salary issue, the compensation issue has come up. So PEG, Preschool Expansion Grant, is a model for how you might do that, but I like to talk about the hopeful and positive things, but I will share one not hopeful and positive thing, which is that every spring I meet with the students and their families who are accepted, offered admission to the early education major at UMass Boston. And often the students say they're really interested in working in Head Start or a community-based childcare program. They want to work with infants or toddlers. And the parents say, no, 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 you want to get the public school teaching certification. And it's a track in our program. And the reason is that early childhood education, if you look at the data out there on college majors, is when you get a job after college with your BA, early childhood education is the lowest paying career. Computer science is the highest. So we have to fix that. We know that what could have a greater impact on society and give us a greater impact and return on our investment than early childhood education. So we have to put our money where our values are.
Thank you. Jocelyn, I'm going to come to you in a moment to talk about the system as the representative of the system on the stage. But I'd like, Jason, I can't imagine that this isn't a challenge in the Boston Public Schools as well. So could you comment using the microphone under your seat?
Sure. So, I mean, the workforce is a challenge for all of us, but I think when you pay teachers more money, and we don't have the same access challenges to community-based programs. You know, I think that was your question, sorry, because I was answering another question. But I think getting teachers who are focused on early childhood is a challenge in the public schools, because most teachers and the whole system is designed for K-12. And so to get teachers who are willing to give away more of the planning and letting children sort of facilitate their learning and being more reflective practitioners in a system that is designed around accountability and children producing certain things. That's where I think our challenge has been with the workforce. And I think we have been pretty successful at motivating the system to allow strong early childhood education to kind of permeate. And so it has changed our culture in a way. But I think then reaching out to families and thinking about what it means to be in a community with families that children are raised in. When they're younger, they really are much more connected to their families. I'm not saying older kids aren't connected to their families, but young children really need their families in a very different way. And getting the teaching and the workforce to really acknowledge that that you need to talk to the families, you need to support, and there's this strong social emotional component to young children, and that they do cry and they do need to have diapers changed sometimes, or I'm saying, like, all the things that come with younger kids, the system wasn't designed for. And really thinking through like nap time and things like that has just been a fascinating process. So it's a very different kind of workforce challenge, but I think a challenge nonetheless.
Great, thank you. So Jocelyn, how does the state think about the system and creating the conditions and context for quality in both the public schools and community-based programs?
Okay, so I think we are thinking about both of those issues, obviously. I do want to acknowledge that we are, to some degree, working in slightly separate systems, and that's been something that's been a real interesting thing for me to see in working with the programs in the preschool expansion grant. We are working in 5 communities across the state, and in each community we have partnerships that we're building between the public school districts and the local EEC license programs. And bringing those worlds together is really an important piece of this work, both in terms of building the individual relationships between people in each of those worlds, and also building an understanding of how those systems are or not aligned and what could be done to build the alignment. In terms of the EEC license programs that we work with, both access and quality are really important parts of the system, and pieces that we need to think about. I think it's come up. It is a complex system. There are many different parts. They're all interrelated, and when you make changes, you don't always know what the ripple effect will be of the changes that we make. So without turning our back on access, EEC is focusing right now on thinking about how can we improve quality but also maintain stability in the system and not move too fast and destabilize the system as we move forward. We have many grants that support quality, both in terms of giving grants directly to programs to support quality improvement efforts within programs, and also grants that go to efforts to support the skills of the workforce. So that's one mechanism that we have. In thinking about continued stability in the system, the funding in the system is obviously a very important piece, and I think this feeds directly into the conversation about compensation as well. EEC is very committed to having strong rates and having rates that are at the market rate. We continue to support rate increases, including one of the highest ones we've had ever this year. But at the same time, I think it's important to recognize that as we increase rates, programs are not allowed to bill parents at a lower rate than an EEC rate if they accept subsidies.
And Jocelyn, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
Just
sure.
for the uninitiated in the audience,
Yeah,
could you
sure.
just say a word about the rates?
Yeah, so EEC manages the subsidized childcare system. We provide vouchers to parents, and programs can also hold contracts to serve families who receive subsidies to support access to early education for their children. It's primarily, this is largely federal funding, and it's primarily a work support for families, although the federal government is moving increasingly towards thinking about how we support quality in the system as well. The rates that EEC bills out are, what we pay programs for this service. So we have control to some degree over those rates. At the same time, as we increase rates, the cost of childcare is going to increase across the system inherently, and there's a risk of a counterproductive reduction of access to the private pay families as a result of those increases in rates. So this is, these are the types of things that you need to sort of carefully balance as you move forward in building the system. The other piece that's really important in this conversation is the nature of the workforce, as we've been discussing, and thinking about how we are supporting the workforce and building its skills. Early education has historically been a very accessible career, and certainly in terms of the entry-level requirements for licensed programs, they are not terribly onerous. This is very different than the public schools, where you really need to come at least with a bachelor's and have the expectation of earning the master's in the time that you're working. So we have teachers coming in with high school degrees, and as Ann pointed out, then moving towards increased education over time while they're working. And what we really want and are focusing on right now is thinking about how we're mapping out those steps for teachers. We're working on building a lattice that identifies the various roles that are available in the field, the competencies that we expect of educators in different roles, and providing a roadmap to educators moving through the system of the steps that they can take, both in terms of their education, their training, their experiences to build themselves as a professional and move forward in the system.
Great, thank you. So many directions we could go in. But I'd like to stick with the workforce for just a minute. And Anne, maybe I can come back to you and ask you, because so many of the early childhood educators are working while they are pursuing their degrees, from a systems perspective, is it really important that they earn bachelor's degrees?
Well, from a quality perspective, which presumably is the purpose of the system, is to support and strengthen quality, absolutely. Jason has great data on the success of BPS K-1 classrooms on child outcomes, and his teachers have master's degrees. That's not unrelated to the outcomes he's achieving. The research is very clear that teachers who have college degrees with specialized training in early care and education are more effective in working with young children. The job of working with young children is very complex. If you think about the range of skills, knowledge, and competency of 3- and 4-year-old children, that range is huge in the early years. And part of it's because brains of young children are developing so rapidly, and they develop on their own individual pathway. So you have a classroom of children who are so different from one another. And it makes the work incredibly complex. It requires so much knowledge about how individual children develop. We've been doing personalized teaching and education in early childhood forever. That's what the nature of our field is. We call it developmentally appropriate practice, but it's really about responding to the individual needs of every single child in the class. And so you can even see Jason talks about taking some of these lessons from the K-1 classrooms and moving them up into 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. I think there's some of my take on that is that there's some things that we know in early childhood that actually could apply to older grades and could strengthen the elementary grades and possibly even more.
Thank you. So coming back to the provider perspective, and Sharon, I think I'll come to you first again. So I I think we've heard a compelling case for why we need to support the credentialing and the skill building for educators. We've also heard from Kelly that 39% of the early childhood workforce qualifies for public assistance. How do we balance the competing demands? How does the money work?
It doesn't right now. I think that, and I'd like to go a little bit off of the workforce in the sense of what else is needed, because the workforce is incredibly important and it is our priority, but those resources for the programming are really, really important. And right now we don't have enough resources, not only for the workforce, but the other aspects of quality. I think leadership at the center level. So we've, a good teacher can't do his or her work in a place that doesn't have good leadership. So we need good leaders at the management and the supervision level. We need stable funding. So, Jocelyn talked about the rates. There's an inherent challenge with the system that we now have that is based on eligibility for certain things, the parental eligibility, and if the parent loses the eligibility, the funding goes away. So it is an unstable funding source that we have now, and we have to get to stability. With the PEG funding, it's been a little bit different because it's been a source that you're getting the resources and the revenue without triggers of parental activity or action. And I think that's something else that's critical to look at in the future. The other thing is our families, and because we run a Head Start program, we're serving the most vulnerable, lowest income, they come with the trauma of poverty. And so that for a teacher who's a great teacher has to deal with homelessness of families, has to deal with the opioid crisis, has to deal with health issues. And so again, the supports around that teacher, compensation is critical, the supports around that teacher and the programming that we need for the kids that we serve and that we want to excel is incredibly important. So I know I took us a little bit
That's
off, but
okay.
it's the context that we live in every day that we're trying to figure out how we get high quality instruction, high quality comprehensive services. How do we connect with families and help them?
Right, so I think what I'm hearing is it's money and other challenges within the context. Wayne, can you comment on the challenges that we're talking about here?
Sure. So one of the great things about what we're learning from these UPK strategies, both in Boston and elsewhere, is we actually know what it takes to provide high quality. And we've known for quite some time. We need to get better at it, and we'll learn more, but we know what these key elements are. One of the challenges, I think, as we think about integrating a public school system and a state EEC system, is it forces us to consider elements of that system that gets in the way. I would say one of them is we have tasked the Department of Early Education and Care with a competing interest. We have said serve all the kids or the most kids and do it at a quality with the same amount or diminishing funds. That is on any given day, that is a recipe for something other than success. And so I think we have to come to terms with this simple fact that the K1 and PEG project is showing us. We know the path to quality. And I suspect, or I believe, that once we know this, we owe it to our kids to deliver on that promise. If we can deliver it to 100 children, then we should deliver it to 100. If we can deliver it to 200 children, we should deliver it to 200. Making the choice to serve 500 at a lesser quality is no longer, I believe, a viable approach. In fact, I suspect investors will invest more if those 200 kids were getting the highest quality possible. And I think that's something that really systematically needs to be addressed. One of the opportunities that we have is we actually have, as Ron said, we no longer have an access issue, right? The kids are somewhere. Some are in better quality than others. We know what the elements of quality are. And we have both the city and the state with funds actually wanting to invest in those same programs. Systemically, what we'll be interested interesting is if both systems could say, how can we utilize the money we currently have jointly? Not like toddlers playing side by side, but jointly to provide the quality for those kids in those 4-year-old kids in those classrooms in our community-based programs. And to design that with the knowledge of how community-based programs function. We designed the current system with the knowledge about how BPS functions, and that's perfectly logical. As we go about designing it for community-based programs, we need to have that same approach. What works well within this context? And we've seen this in many other places. The slide showed some of the other cities that are engaged, and so we know how to do this. And one way that I think about it is sort of a family-centered customer approach. So I live in Roxbury, and I have 3 neighbors who are taking advantage of K1. None of them are low income, because my low-income neighbors can't access it because of some of the challenges that they talked about in terms of the number of hours. But my point really is that parents will choose the system that works best for them. Let's build quality wherever, whether it's in a Head Start program, whether it's in a child care program or a BPS program, and then parents will choose what works best. But we have to agree to build the quality. And I suggest we start off by integrating the money that we have to do quality, and let the legislature figure out how to increase access. So anyway, let me not just ramble on.
Thank you. Kelly, we've talked about what quality is. I think I'm hearing that we know what quality is, and that we need to take certain steps. Part of it is workforce, part of it is money, part of it is resources and parents' partnerships. What role does collaboration between programs play in this conversation about shared learning, improving educator quality? How do you think about that at Charlestown Nursery School?
Clearly we have about 1,000 visitors who come through the school a year to sort of see what makes high quality. And I think we turn to Boston, obviously, to see a lot of those indicators. I would say, though we all in this room may understand what high quality is, there is great discrepancy between programs. And I think to Wayne's point, we also have to think carefully about the resources that we have. Low quality programs are not free either. And so I think, to empower us while we simultaneously sort of look long-term at how to increase salaries and have that vision and build budgets that are first about salaries and then sort of a backward design, while we look at sort of the indicators that I think Boston has been very generous at outlining for us about high quality teachers, a coaching model, clear curriculum, we also have an opportunity within the next month and within the next year and the next 2 years to really change the experiences for the children who are right in front of us. And I think those of us who are in centers are thinking about that every day. What do you do tomorrow that improves quality? What do you do a month from now that improves quality? And I think one of the things, again, that Boston has really shown us is that collective vision of what quality is. And because teachers are coming with varied experiences, I don't think yet in Boston we have that clarity. I don't think enough of us have been in the Boston public schools to see what they're doing that's working well. I don't think enough of us have been in community-based programs to see what's working well. And I think that would really elevate our conversation. I think we can develop as a city some sort of shared agreements and shared understandings of what the indicators are. Because Boston has been so generous with the indicators, because Ann has, because the state with their QRIS, I think we can walk into a program and start to see indicators from quality and change them within a moment. I often give the example of, last week we had visitors from Singapore visiting us, and we walked through Charlestown and saw 3 different programs, and they all would have met many of the standards, but they were drastically different. And some of that was about the teacher compensation and the teacher pay, but it wasn't completely about that. It was about where we were dedicating our resources. We still in Boston have too many private pay centers that are, top centers that are still paying teachers $18,000 a year or $24,000 for a lead teacher. We have to go back to our budgets and we have to say, where can we streamline our resources? Where can we be more strategic? We also, I think, have too many programs that are implementing curriculum that doesn't make sense. So Boston has given us some examples of high quality curriculum and high quality experiences. And so we can make choices about what we do, each day to sort of create a better equity in our system. And I think we can hold each other accountable while we keep in mind this sort of long-term goal of workforce development. And that's through the collaboration, and I think exploring programs within our city, within our state, but then also looking nationally and looking globally to some of the best examples that we have.
And Kelly's comment sort of sparked something for me, which was, it sounds like many of these centers are, in fact, small businesses. And the business is educating children, but they operate with budgets and staff and the pressures that come with that. How do we strengthen a sector that is small business?
So the first thing I would say is that we look to strategies that work in small business and self-employment industries, because that is in fact what the early care and education sector is. It's not a big public service or education system. So we really need to think about, well, how do you strengthen a small business sector in any industry, and what lessons might we learn to apply to the early care and education sector. So at our Institute for Early Education Leadership and Innovation, we've been looking at a lot of those kinds of models to build on something that Sharon said, this issue of the workforce isn't just teachers. We often forget that there are leaders and administrators and instructional leadership teams in early childhood programs, and there's been almost zero investment, except in Head Start, in strengthening, in credentialing, in higher education programs or training, coaching, and mentoring around instructional leadership. And I'm thrilled that that Boston and PEG EEC has begun to invest in instructional leadership and really saying, wow, we need to train teachers and we need to enhance their capabilities, but we've also got to look at the administration and the leadership in programs. And then, so that's one point. And then the related point is we work with a lot of small business owners who run childcare businesses in urban neighborhoods in the city of Boston. And one thing we found is they've said things to us like, well, there's all these trainings on this aspect or quality of this curriculum, but we're about to fold. We're about to go under because we're just hemorrhaging money. We cannot afford to stay open. We can't pay our rent. And so there's really an important need for investing in strengthening the business model and doing coaching around business practices and budgeting and marketing so that programs can actually strengthen the foundation of the business. Once people have a solid foundation financially, they're able to invest in quality and to utilize the resources we have for quality improvement. But you can't be focusing on implementing a new literacy curriculum if you can't make your payroll. So, I think we've got to remember that there's the business side, and there've been almost no resources for small business owners to help them do that work, and that's an essential part of quality.
Sure. I think one of the things that we've been able to do with PEG is take advantage of, I think, economies of scale. And so some of the larger programs have that within their own organizations, but I think that small businesses and early childhood centers and even family childcare who can leverage a larger group, and in this case with PEG, the Boston Public Schools and the coaching and the instructional, and then other programs that might have family support systems and other systems, leveraging the community and being able to create essentially economies of scale across a system, across a city. And with UPK, I think we can think more about that as we move forward, because I don't think that a small center is going to be able to have the type of sort of infrastructure within it. It's just sort of a bottom line business budgeting issue. But I do think that a larger system that can share the coaching, that can share the training, that can share the family supports and resources, external resources for families, is where we could go. And we've demonstrated that a little bit with PEG.
A couple of things I'd love to highlight. One of them is just echo what Sharon just said, that what I see evolving with PEG is some sort of shared model and the benefits of scale by bringing and knitting together institutions. And I think there's a lot more of that we can actually do. But the other thing I want to highlight is a sense of urgency. tied to what Ann was saying. What I see happening in Boston, Jason's slide talked about in 2005, the mayor of Boston said, we want to do UPK. Well, around 2006, the community-based providers said, whoa, we can foresee a significant challenge coming in the future unless we coordinate this. And a process of coordination occurred that resulted in the creation of Thrive in 5, but it didn't slow down the growth. So Thrive in 5 was created out of that process, but the solution didn't occur. And now what we're seeing is I see my peers going out of business like that across Roxbury, Dorchester, and some of the low-income neighborhoods. The problem with that is those providers are actually serving kids birth to 5. And so the city is losing its infrastructure, which is something for the city to be really concerned about. PEG gives us a path forward if we move fast enough, because that business reality, it isn't so much that those providers don't know how to run their business. Providers are like poor people. They know how to create good budgets. If you know anybody who's poor, they're the best budgeters you know. So that's not the issue. The issue is we've been allowing the system to undermine an element of our greater Boston system, but we now know how to stop it, how to reverse it, and how to strengthen what remains. But it is important that we do so quickly, because reality keeps moving.
Thank you for bringing up the birth to 3-year-olds. We focus so much of our conversation on four-year-olds in pre-K, but it's important to remember that in the broader context, we're talking about from prenatal all the way through kindergarten. Jocelyn, we're hearing a lot about the Boston story. That's on purpose, but could you please put that in context? How does Boston compare to other communities in the state? Is this the same story statewide, or is this slightly different?
So it's been very interesting working with the 5 communities that we have been through the preschool expansion grant, and that each community is very different. And just to frame out the context a little bit, what the state did in putting out those grants is we set out the quality requirements, the requirements of be a teacher in every classroom. The compensation has to be parity with public school. There needs to be a curriculum. Teachers need to be using formative assessment, and there's an expectation that there is joint professional development, both across the programs and also with the public school system. So the public schools have taken a leadership role in supporting the professional development of teachers in all 5 communities. The expectation that family engagement, there's strong family engagement, that comprehensive services are being provided is also an important part of these programs. But then we went to the communities and said, okay, you put together your leadership team with leadership from the EC license program and the public school, and you build your system. You decide what you want locally and what it should look like. We've heard a lot about what's happening in Boston, but every community has been very different. The public schools have been in different places in terms of how they're thinking about early education. They're all committed to it, but in some public schools, they haven't really spent a lot of time in that space beyond providing some integrated pre-K classrooms, and other public schools are more similar to Boston, where they have done a lot of work in terms of thinking about the curriculum that they are using in their pre-K classrooms and how they might want to build alignment community-wide around that curriculum and providing supports around the curriculum. So the nature of the partnerships has varied from very much of a contractual relationship saying, okay, we are going to subgrant you these funds and we want you to run pre-K classrooms and bring your expertise to the table and run the programs that you are running, and we will have conversations about alignment, to programs that are very similar, more similar to Boston, where it's there was a very strong, unified focus around the curriculum, the instruction, supports for instruction, and the assessment that's happening in the classroom.
So as a follow-up, we know from research that Jason and Ron cited that Boston's quality programming in the BPS is a national model. But I'm wondering if you could characterize the pace of our progress as a city in context of what you see statewide. That's probably unfair, but if you could characterize how are we doing? Are we moving with the urgency that Wayne has raised for us?
I think just to be clear about my point of reference and thinking statewide, it's the preschool expansion grant programs that we've been working with. The state has also funded planning grants, and those have reached 11 other communities across the states in addition to the preschool expansion grant communities. And those planning grants have supported local efforts to start the process of building the relationships and doing the planning that bring together the local early education system and the public school districts to think about what would it look like, what do we have now, what is the system that we have, what are the needs of the families in our community, how can we plan ahead to build a system that would meet the needs of the local needs in the community, leverage the resources that we currently have, and then build and strengthen and integrate them. So I would certainly say I think that Boston has a long history of doing this work. Jason was talking about the 12 years of developing the pre-K curriculum in the Boston Public Schools and thinking about the supports that could be provided. I think the preschool expansion grant came along at a time where it was able to support the efforts to build out into the local community-based programs, which was a very important part of that process in every community. The other thing that Boston has done, and Ron talked about this, is the mayor's office has really taken a lead in driving this work, which I think is somewhat unique. And all the various plans and efforts that we've seen, certainly in some of the communities, the mayor's office has been involved in the planning process, but really in taking the lead. That's something that generally the public schools do. And the very thoughtful and careful needs assessment and planning to think about where are the families, where is the need. I think that's something that we've learned in the very, very rapid implementation that we had to do with the preschool expansion grant. We had 6 months, effectively, from receiving funding to getting programs up and off the ground in these communities. And I think in retrospect, realized that it would have been really, really nice to be able to map out where families were and where the need was in the communities and think very strategically about where programs are located and where we're putting seats. So I think that that's an important step as well that Boston has taken to move forward in implementing something that will be effective and reach families where they are.
Thank you. And I have 2 more questions before we throw it open to the audience. The first is, I think almost every one of you has referenced that a unique asset of the early childhood community is the engagement with families. So can you talk about the work with families and what role that might play in sort of forging this new system, if any? How do families factor into building a system of quality for children in pre-K?
So I said a little earlier, I think we need to take a family-centered approach or a customer-focused approach. And that comes from the fact that I have seen significant policy shifts happen, whether it's the 10 years ago, however long ago, when we revamped the education system and discovered that the kids in our neighborhoods, after all the investment, didn't see much of an improved outcome. And I suspect to some degree it's because families weren't engaged in the process to develop a set of approaches that actually meets their needs. And while we know a lot about quality, I think one of the things that we actually still don't yet know very well is, but we could figure out, is what do families need for them to thrive? Because if they don't thrive, their kids won't. Kids come with their families, they always do, and not thinking about one will harm the other. And our ability to improve the trajectory for kids' lives is fully dependent on those families. It's particular when they're low income because they have less access to resources and knowledge and opportunities. And so I think we need to engage them in the design, meaningfully engage them in design. And B, when they're part of this, when their child is within our programs, we need to engage them in activities that move their lives forward in the direction that they design for themselves, because they're quite capable with support. To not lean in that direction is to minimize our impact. But I don't think we understand that well enough yet, partially because we don't know how to measure that as well. So we mostly understand the things that we are quite good at measuring. But I do think that's part of, and that's part of what Peg's been talking about as well, as what can and should we be doing? We've been learning from Head Start because they've been doing that work much longer than anybody else. But what can and should we be doing in relations to families so that they can thrive? And if they thrive, their kids will thrive. Because at the end of the day, I just feel like it must be said, at the end of the day, a parent is the single most impactful person in the trajectory of their kids' lives, no matter how much we think we are great as teachers. Woohoo! Forgot I'm on camera. So I think engaging families and focusing also on their wellness is key strategies that this educational approach need to learn from what community-based programs have been doing for years.
Thank you. So we've hit on the workforce, families, money, resources, and the overall operations of community-based programs, as well as the curriculum. do we have the plan in place that we need to move us to a place where at some, maybe a year from now, maybe some point in the future, we can say with every confidence that every child in Boston can access a high-quality pre-K experience. So do we have the plan in place, and if not, what do we need to do? And that's open for anybody. Sharon?
I think we have the pieces. I don't think we yet have the full plan. And I think because that encompasses all of the aspects that we've talked about, and they're not yet all fitting together. And so I think, again, we've made great strides with the preschool expansion grant in trying to move pieces forward and put a system and put a plan in place. But I think we have work to do. And I think that's, we have all the tools, we have the knowledge, as Wayne said and everybody has said. So we just need to kind of work on how to implement those things.
I think there's some I sit here today quite excited about where we are. I haven't always felt excited about where we are, to be frank. But I feel like we have great promise to make the rest of the steps. Some key elements I think are necessary. Forming that advisory that includes community-based programs and give it authority to influence decision-making. If the provider community-based population doesn't have that kind of authority, then their voice just won't be as relevant. And so I think that's a key step, and that's already in the making. The other aspect of the plan that I think is key is for EEC and BPS and the City of Boston to actually design how to integrate their resources, because I just don't know enough about the political system to know whether or not the convention center thing will work. But money exists currently within the system. And so part of the plan that is quite doable is to link those funds. And that's I think a second element. And then the third element is the talent piece. We need a pipeline of talent, and we need to reward the ones we have now. Those three elements, I think, will move us towards finishing the elements of the system that's not yet in place.
Before I put Ron on the spot, anyone else want to comment on, do we have the plan in place?
I think we do have the plan in place. I think we're in a really critical moment. I think we've identified our goals, and I think we're committed to quality. I think, Boston will only be as good as their community-based programs are in partnership with them, and that 0 to 3 piece will really position the UPK success. So I think we have a real opportunity to learn from their lessons and to begin implementing it quickly. I think we have to continue to train the teachers who are in front of us. I think we have to take the lessons in curriculum and family engagement. We are in Boston. We have an incredible amount of resources and tools and knowledge base. And I think, to Ann's point, I think linking teachers to those research institutions, not just when they're getting their bachelor's degree, but throughout. And I think that continual professional development as a model is really helpful. I think looking at BPS and the kinds of really tangible things that happen even beyond resources, like planning time each day, coaching supports, very specific curriculum, are all things that we can sort of tick off, I think, very, very quickly. So as Jason says, I think there's no reason not to roll up our sleeves right now, because I think we can see real measurable change very quickly and a return on investment that's pretty powerful.
Thank you. So Ron, a year from now, where should we expect to be?
Testing. Is this thing on? A couple of things. First of all, I want to thank the panelists. So, one, to thank them for the fact that they've been great teachers for me throughout this whole process, and so I don't think I'd be able to serve the cause if it wasn't for your mentorship. But also, thank you for your partnership prior and going forward. One more thing, my mom texted me and said she's here. All right, hey Mom. Which means I need to be on my A game. So, two answers to where we should be
year?
In a year. So one answer is about where we should be with currently anticipated funding and where we might be with full funding. And so with currently anticipated funding, I think where we will be is having raised the quality floor in some ways. You may not consider this progress, but trust me, it is. We've got to preserve PEG, the pre-expansion grant initiative. So if we do not preserve the work that Sharon and Wayne and others have done through that, we go from a 1,500 quality seat gap to an 1,800 quality seat gap, and the problem gets bigger. So we've got to invest there. Secondly, you will see the citywide infrastructure being built for UPK. So our citywide director, as well as that oversight and governance team. You'll see the initial investments in teachers in the city. And so I think you will see the Curriculum Institute come online, teacher training come online, the expansion of our coaching capacity, and hopefully you will see the beginnings of tuition assistance for our professionals who are seeking degrees. Fourth, you will see demonstrations of the systems building we need to do. And I mentioned the feeder pattern piece that we need to address. It's also about figuring out how are we going to address the needs of special needs learners across all settings, because none of us is doing that at the level of quality that we want to be. Now with full funding, I think what you will see is us expanding those settings that are already meeting the quality threshold, and then investing in those settings where they're just at the cusp of the quality threshold and making sure that they get there. So part of what you'll see is the investment in tuition payments, which I said was a big ticket item, but if we want this to be free, that's the first big ticket item to pay for. Secondly, the teacher compensation piece. We'll start to go deep on that and do equalization with full funding. And then lastly, expanded tuition assistance. And I think those things are doable in a year, but the big ticket items will be additive with further funding.
Great. Well, thank you. And clearly, a lot is happening and a lot to do. Please join me in thanking Ron and Jason and the panel. And now I'd like to open it up for your questions. We have microphones around the room, and so if you have a question, please wait for Heather to come to you and tell us who you are. Heather, there's a question over here. Or Michelle. Tell us who you are and frame your comment as a question.
Hi, I'm Peggy Wiesenberg, and I am a parent of 3 children who went to the Shattuck Pre-K, Early Learning Center West, and the Boston Public Schools K-12. So I have 2 questions about 2 issues that nobody talked about. One is unions, and the other is facilities. So when 20 years ago at the Early Learning Center, when we, on the school site council, realized that teachers who were providing surround care before the instructional day and after the instructional day had the full classroom of kids. They were not paraprofessionals assisting a teacher. I testified in the legislature about that, and several years later, the school system and BTU followed our suggestion to create a different job classification, credentials, and funding, and some of the things you're thinking about. So the question is, how are we working with unions and possibly unionizing the community-based workers? The other is facilities. The state, Shattuck, for instance, was started in the 40s as a workplace-based center. It got kicked out of the building and is temporarily in a church and doesn't know if it's going to survive. So Boston is boomtown. What is the city doing to require developers or others to provide space?
So thank you. So the question is about what role do unions play in community-based programs or presumably in the BPS? And also, what about facilities? How are we thinking about ensuring high-quality facilities for children? Ron, you look like you want to jump up and tackle that question.
You look like you want me to jump up and So for community-based settings, I'm going to defer to Wayne and Sharon and Kelly to tackle that a little bit, and maybe Jason to talk about where unions have come into the K-1 piece. I'll address facilities first on that. So one, I think Peggy knows this and other people in the room, that we are launching the Build BPS work. So this is the mayor's $1 billion investment in school renewal, expansion, upgrade of facilities. And part of what we've got to do, if you look at the report that we put out in March, is assess where we need to build new K-1 classrooms and what those facilities need to look like inside of schools. Now, mind you, this is a mixed delivery system. So the work that we need to do is not just building BPS classrooms as well. So that concern that Wayne raised with you about kind of the shift in market share is going to be moderated by a more measured neighborhood by neighborhood take on where we actually need to invest in school building facilities. Now, I don't know if the Children's Investment Fund is in the room. Yep, they're my friends from the Children's Investment Fund. These are the folks who've helped us invest in community-based buildings over time. And so I think we're going to have a lot deeper conversations about how we systematically support community-based organizations as well. The mayor is dedicated to making sure that there is access to modern learning space wherever it is needed in the city of Boston, and in a mixed delivery system that includes our community-based organizations as well. I will let you folks kind of tackle the issue of unionization in your shops. And Jason, anything you want to say about the history of K-1?
I think I might be the only one that actually has a union. My union would be very, very happy, by the way, if we created this partnership, because then their members would be getting paid a better salary. I think that the challenges might be more with the BPS union, quite frankly, because it would mean that expansion occurs outside of their purview, and I don't know how to speak to that. I will say I do not view the state of investment or insufficient investment in early ed as a particular union issue, but I could be wrong about that, and so that's as far as I can go there. I actually think space matters, right? Facilities matter. It's why people with the resources build beautiful places and go to beautiful places, because it feeds the soul. And so place matters. And the Children's Investment Fund and the money that EEC invests in facilities, I think is a really key element for achieving the goals that we want to achieve for our young children. What's great about it is we actually have the infrastructure. We have a mechanism for the legislature to deliver funds to the administration, for the administration to deploy those funds and give it to the Children's Investment Fund to actually get it to programs. And we have a great set of standards that the investment fund created years ago. So we have all these elements in place to take full advantage of as it relates to facilities. Again, I'm uneducated about the complexities around the union piece.
Kelly, it looked like you wanted to comment.
Well, I would say just in terms of facilities, I mean, we're in a very, very small space. And just to give you a sense, it's less than 4,000 square feet, and it's $11,000 a month. So we know in budgeting how much that can impact the work that you're doing. I think in the same way we think of public-private partnerships and collaboration, which I think the Boston Foundation is so committed to, there's also collaboration within the city departments. And I think we're thinking innovatively around the BRA and development and how do we plan neighborhoods where there are spaces for centers. We still have all too many centers that are in basements or without windows or in conditions that are just unacceptable. But it's not enough to build great facilities, and I always would say that I would rather have well-paid and well-compensated teachers, which we're able to do, because it's never about the size of the playground or the $1 million space, it's about the teachers. So when we have to prioritize around resources, I think we have to go again first to salaries and then build facilities around that. So, but I think there are opportunities to make sure that people who are struggling with space, as we are, find those spaces within this thriving economy. The second thing I would think, with or without unions, there's this workforce rights issue and workforce conditions issue. And I think that we have an incredible opportunity, again, to think innovatively about our structures within what we have. Let's not stop keeping our eye on the prize about greater salaries and better buildings and all of those things. We've got to work sort of at that long-term plan. But immediately, I think we can be innovative in our structures to make sure people get breaks, which all too many educators are not getting. And we can think about the range of different positions in a center, the range of different caregivers for children, and that means thinking about family childcare and thinking about home-based daycares and thinking about nannies and grandparents and that whole extended family system, as well as that whole extended system within a particular center. So I think we can do a lot to improve the conditions of people who are before and after school within the context of our current systems.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm from one of the 0 to 3 nonprofits that we've talked a lot about, Room to Grow, and my question is, in the next year, for those of us who are working a lot with parents and with that earlier space, how can we join? What can we do to link up and to really connect and really make this a true collective action that does start at birth?
So I do want to jump up. Thank you for the question. So first of all, I'm going to ask, and I think I've seen you in the meetings as well, that you are part of the Birth to 8 Collective Impact Collaborative. And so this is about 70 organizations in the city trying to think about how we create systems connectivity from birth all the way through early elementary. And so I think the next phase of that work is us really choosing what are we going to concretely demonstrate in the 0 to 3 space. And I think a lot of this is about figuring out the combination of quality improvement and economic development investment. Also know that this is a frequent topic of discussion between John Barros and me. John Barros is the Chief of Economic Development for the city, for whom this is an acute issue and one that I keep raising with him. And so we're trying to urge the administration to think about it from that paradigm as well. I do want to do a shameless plug here because this is something that I've been a part of and believe deeply in, but we've got the Boston Basics team here. And so if you, Wendell and Mary, stand up real quick. So Wendell Knox, Mary Barrera, representing the Boston Basics. And so the Boston Basics is a citywide campaign to help every caregiver understand what are the 5 basic things that you need to do to promote brain development and kindergarten readiness for any child in the city. We've amassed about 100 partners right now, including healthcare systems like Partners, churches, early learning centers, but this is really about infusing software into the hardware of the places that already touch parents and getting to every caregiver. And what the panelists told you is that parents are important first and foremost. So this is about equipping them and making them authentic partners in the learning process. And so what I will look forward to, particularly at the Birth to 8 table, is to figure out what strategies we're going to start to test over the next year. We've done a lot of planning because we know how to plan in Boston and talk about what we're about to do. Now we're about to do it. So I look forward to it.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Carol. I work at Boston Children's Museum. And just following on from that last wonderful point, I represent, of course, the cultural sector. And there's a lot that we can do in the cultural sector to support the wellness of families, as Wayne said. And Jerry has a magnificent vision, Jerry Robinson, about entitling children and families in Boston being entitled to the cultural riches of our city. I mean, we have some of the greatest symphonies, museums in the world, and many, many children in Boston do not have the opportunity to attend some of these institutions. So while we're thinking about the big picture and the Birth to A Collaborative, which of course we're involved, I'd also like us to remember that the cultural institutions of the city have a role to play, and Jerry and I are very committed to actually trying to find a way to make those resources accessible to every single Boston child.
Thank you.
So Ron, how about it?
I don't want to cut you off, Kelly, but I'll just make a plug that I think a lot of the solutions to some of these challenges we're facing are in this room at this moment. So if you'd like to learn more about the Birth to 8 Collaborative, please see Kristen McSwain from the Boston Opportunity Agenda. We have the Boston Basics team here with Wendell and Mary, and then of course the Children's Museum represented by Carol and Jerry. Lots of talented resources and people here to network with. So Kelly, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always say that children learn in a variety of different settings, and I think our measure of whether we do this well is whether every parent can know those 5 things, and every parent knows how to access the cultural institutions, and every parent, I think this is really about is a social justice issue in our view, that I think we have multiple Bostons, and I think those collaborations are trying to level the playing field, and we have all the resources to do it. It's about coordination in our view. So I am grateful for the work that people do in the nonprofit and cultural institutions, because I think we can link with that well. But this issue to us about parents is really what we find is when parents from different communities come through our center, there is this great question about, wait a second, some of these things don't look like the other. And I think when people start to have that conversation about why are these different and what can we do about increasing the equity, I think parents are the best advocates, and I think we'll see a real movement around wanting this for every child. But we have to make it visible, and we have to make sure they know what they're looking for.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, my name is Melora Balson. Because we're at the Boston Foundation, I guess my question is, what do anyone here think of as the most strategic investments that private donors could make? We've heard a lot about the public resources that are needed, and I don't think that private donors are likely to be the folks who are creating the salaries for all of the ECE workers. But in terms of strategic investments for private donors, if anyone had thoughts about that.
I think it's immediately around sort of sharing this vision with every provider, educator, and parent. So I think there are great opportunities to invest in sort of these kindergarten collaboratives, in shared resources and shared provider training. I think we have to train the educators who are in front of us as we move forward to higher salaries. I think these public service announcements and some of the information that Boston Basics and the cultural centers have to really sort of elevate this conversation around Boston of what does high quality look like, and how can we make that a priority in every single classroom, because I think we can see great gain, and Jason has those examples of going into community centers and providers at every single level of education with more training and with more experience, more regularly and more consistently and more aligned with what Boston is doing, I think would make a great impact right away. And I think all of us who run centers always are eager for professional development opportunities for the providers and educators that we have.
So I think both Wayne and Sharon wanted to jump in. I think Jason did too.
I guess for me, it's about the talent at the end of the day. If investors want to invest, I say invest in talent. And by that I mean either invest in the talent that exists to grow their talent, or invest in supporting and creating systems, because we don't yet have one within the birth to 5 space. We don't yet have a particularly good mechanism or infrastructure to source, attract, develop, retain talent. One of the interesting things when I heard Jason talk about how they've pivoted to the kindergarten, first and second grade, I imagine a lot of that has to do with pivoting towards the talent, and I think that's a really great space for non-governmental funders to come in and create some best practices that can then be scaled and so on and so forth by government.
I think I would agree with Kelly and Wayne. I also think we have to look at it as short-term investments and long-term investments. And so because private funding is often shorter term, how can we think about, can there be long-term? Can there be 10-year investments in something so that we can invest in things, whether it's salaries or whether it's systems or infrastructure, but there's a longer-term guarantee that this funding and support will be there. And then there's the short-term investments. We mentioned facilities. Facilities are huge, and they don't fit into people's budgets. I mean, you just can't, repairs and all of that. And I agree with Kelly that at the end of the day, you know, a good teacher, that'd probably be on your priority list. But none of us who live in communities of resource would ever accept some of the places that we put low-income children in. And so we have to deal with that equity issue. And even though, yes, we have great teachers and it's a great education, it is about equity in the experience of low-income children and families. And so those are good investments. The line item that Wayne talked about, I think it's $4 million. I mean, $4 million statewide to invest. And we continue to, you know, ask the legislature, and we're grateful for the legislature and the governor for investing that capital funding, but it could be 50 times that amount. And so if the private sector can do some of that short-term investment, I think that would be good as well. So long-term and short-term.
Before we go to Jason, I realized I skipped Anne, so sorry about that.
Well, I love this conversation because everything that you have indicated, I would wholeheartedly support. And I think there are a lot of gaps when it comes to funding, both private and public investment. And I think there is a place for both. And the one thing I would add and build on to the really essential things that have already been mentioned is this gap in investment in leadership. I don't think there's any other sector where people neglect the fact that leaders matter and leaders make a difference. And this is a sector where there are almost no public or private investments. We've done some research to look at who does invest in leadership in the early care and education sector. And I'm telling you, when you look at across all different kinds of philanthropies and funders, the list is about this long. There's almost nobody. So I think it's a great opportunity to make a big impact, is to begin investing in innovation in that area, and really developing some evidence-based models that can really inform kind of change at scale.
Thank you. Jason, did you want to?
So where I started before they all said something and where I am now is a different place. I think we need, I was going to start with, we need a champion, right? We need people to champion this cause. But now I think we need a marriage. And because I think that this is going to be a long, productive struggle to knit together a system. And I think that where we started with Boston Kids, what we've done in the preschool expansion grant, where we have worked between the Boston Public Schools and the city of Boston, and creating a vision is just the beginning. But this is going to be a long process, probably a 10-year process. We need long-term investments, we need champions, we need advocates, we need people to make the learning visible, we need people to celebrate the teachers and the wonderful work that is going on currently in the classrooms. So I do think we have all the right elements, but we need a marriage, meaning we need people with dollars and cents and strategic planning to help us build a system. The public schools have systems. The community-based providers do not have a system. They have a state-funded entity that gives them money for subsidies, and they have a licensing, but there is no accountability system that weaves us all together. And I don't want high-stake testing for young children, but I do want accountability. And I do want us to put children first, and that means some buildings are not meant for children. And it means that some teachers are not meant for children. It means some programs are not meant for children, including the public schools. So we need to figure out how to put children first and build these systems together.
Thank you. I'm going to, Jocelyn, I'll come to you in a moment, but I'm going to throw a question on top of that, which is this about scaling what we know? Is this about knitting together a marriage or a system? Or is this about we have to figure out a completely different way of working? All three. That's what I was afraid you'd say.
I'm simpler. I think this has been figured out time and time again. We have examples. Again, they were on the slide. We've already knitting together some. I only say that, not to say that it isn't a challenge. What I don't want anybody to walk out of this room is thinking that this is a challenge that we might not be capable of addressing. This is, to me, a matter of will, more than anything else. And we will be able, but let me pull back. It is a matter of will and is a matter of coming to the table with some shared sense of value. If I come to the table and half the table has a sense of, you may or may not belong at this table because of the quality or lack thereof of quality in your program, that is a very different approach than you are at this table because what you are doing is important and you are part of a whole. And so I think those two things, the will and the recognition that the people and the institutions at the table are in fact the relevant ones. And if we come with that, because the things that we share, Jason and I could have a conversation for a half hour and we would discover very quickly that we agree on 98% of the things, but we might talk about 2%. And so I think and perhaps that's the marriage analogy that you're talking about. But we can, there's a ring here, Jason. But with the will, this is eminently doable.
Thank you. Jocelyn, did you?
I'd like to build on that and push back ever so slightly. I think that there is an awful lot that we know, and it is about bringing all those pieces together. I think different pieces of the system have different strengths, and there's real power in bringing the system together and building on everybody's strengths. I also think there are some things we don't know in early education, and that we're still learning about how to work well with children, thinking about curriculum, the role of curriculum, what is the best curriculum, how do you support teachers in using a curriculum well, what is the role of assessment, what are the natures of the interactions that really lead to the strong outcomes that we want to see. There's a lot of space to continue to push the field forward. I mean, this is really, really hard, complicated work. And then when you take all of those pieces and you put them together in the classroom, that's, the teacher's the one figuring that out. How do we help teachers put those pieces together and develop a practice that's coherent and consistent? So I think, it's important to recognize that these types of partnerships are a really powerful place to do that work and to support that ongoing work, as well as pulling together the pieces that we already have.
Sharon?
I think Jocelyn probably said it all, which I wasn't really joking when I said all three, because I do think there's a lot of things that we are doing well, and we've talked about them today. There are a lot of pieces out there that we just have to, that each of us is doing well, that we have to kind of put together as a system. But there is, as Jocelyn said, a lot that we have to do differently and have to think totally differently. One being the funding piece, one being the compensation of teachers. I mean, that's a totally different way. It's a societal change about early childhood professionals and what they should be compensated. And we underestimate that cultural shift in thinking about the early childhood piece. So I think it's a little of both, and I mean, all three, and that's why it's so complex, but I think we're poised to get there.
Well, thank you. And since we're on a roll, I think I'll take the prerogative of the person with the microphone and close us out with just a thanks to all of you and to the panel and Ron and Jason for being here. I think as I'm closing out, I'm going to turn to my friend Ron for one last word, and then I'll wrap us up.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is so good to me. While I've got you, I need to make some asks, which is why I asked to get back on the mic. So what we need you to do going out of here is first to be messengers to help the rest of the community understand what universal pre-K is about in Boston. So first we need you to help people understand what we're talking about when we're talking about quality. So those elements that we discussed, make sure your peers understand those elements. Make sure that they understand that we're not solving for access in Boston, we are solving for quality in Boston, and that they understand that strategy, and that we're doing this in a mixed delivery way. So this is about our community-based providers and our schools working together to make sure that we've got access to universal high-quality pre-K. Secondly, where you can, advocate for the mayor's proposal. We think it's going to take about $16 million a year to fully fund the universal pre-K in Boston. The proposal that the mayor has in front of the legislature to tap convention center funds would do that for us. So we would ask for your help in doing that. If you don't believe that's the solution, tell your legislature you know somebody who believes that's the solution. We don't want you undermining us, but we but we do want you advocating. Third, join the Boston Basics campaign. This is powerful work, citywide work that we can do easily, and it's an innovative approach, I think, to the work that we need to do to make sure that every child is prepared. So be in touch with Wendell and Mary. And lastly, funders in the room. I think you might have heard that there are sensible but powerful investments that you can make in early implementation that would help us accelerate this work, and we will look forward to talking to you about it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. You summarized far better than I could have. Thank you for being here for what we consider our opening day for early childhood work at the Boston Foundation. This is the start of our learning journey, and we look forward to continuing it with you. We will have another forum, as Paul mentioned, on December 6th, where we'll talk about partnerships and working together, particularly in the healthcare field, with a focus on the first 1,000 days of a baby's life. We'll follow that in January with a deeper dive into the research and high-quality pre-K and a focus on Boston Public Schools. So please come along in this journey with us, and thank you for being here today.